Welcome, everyone. I'm Danielle Ofrey, Editor-in-Chief of Bellevue Literary Review, and I want to welcome everyone to BLR's 2022 Benefit. And I'm so pleased to be joined by my colleague, the BLR Prize-winning poet, Salim Hugh Penny.
Thanks for the welcome, Danielle. I'm Salim Hugh Penny, an assistant poetry editor, and I'm so grateful that we get to spend some time together this evening.
Tonight's theme is the power of the pen, how writing can transform healing. And we're very excited to bring a host of people to explore and maybe even challenge this idea.
Indeed, these conversations are timely and promise to be fruitful because of the diverse range of BLR community members joining us: authors, physicians, reviewers, nurses, editors, med students, readers, public health advocates, literary judges, educators, and visual mixed media artists.
Now, of course, the BLR community is not just limited to bipeds.
You've piqued my curiosity.
We might be joined by a few BLR quadrupeds later this evening. Besides introducing you to the many elements of the BLR community, our goal is also to raise money for BLR. We believe strongly in paying our artists and writers for their work, and your support allows us to continue to do so. You can make a donation at blreview.org/donate. And if you prefer Venmo or PayPal, we are at BL Review.
Before we meet the true stars of the evening, both two-legged and four-legged, we wanted to introduce ourselves. My pronouns are him and friend. By way of a visual description, I'm a black man with bald hair, a handlebar mustache, glasses, a partially visible cochlear implant. I'm wearing a navy blue short sleeve polo shirt with a wooden bow tie. Immediately in my background is a collection of vinyl LPs. I am a mutual aid advocate, volunteer hospital magician, and typically sleep-deprived parent of second-grade twins. I entered the BLR community through the reading guide section of the website. Seeing the 40-plus issues grouped as searchable, cohesive collections had me hooked. I entered the 2021 annual poetry contest and am forever grateful that my contest judge, visual artist, and poet Jen Bervin selected my poem, Nevertheless.
And what an amazing poem that was. In my day job, I'm a primary care doctor at Bellevue Hospital. I'm also a writer. I'm a white woman, not as tall as my teenagers, with curly black hair and glasses. I'm wearing a blue t-shirt, and in my immediate background are my collections of BLRs, plus a host of old photo albums that no one has opened in years. Strategically blocking an unsightly closet is a music stand with BLR's 20th anniversary edition resting atop Brahms' F major cello sonata, which I'm hoping to complete before my 90th birthday, whichever comes first. Now, we started BLR more than 20 years ago because there was no outlet for creative writing about health, illness, and healing. The pandemic unfortunately forced us to leave our university home, and for a moment, we thought BLR might have to close. I'll admit that the spring of 2020 was a bit of a busy time in my day job to be contemplating recreating BLR from the ground up. But a groundswell of support from readers, supporters, donors, editors, and board members allowed us to reconstitute ourselves as a 501c3 nonprofit. In the course of one COVID-laden year, BLR became an independent literary arts organization, doubled its operating budget, celebrated its 20th anniversary, and was awarded a Whiting Prize for, quote, excellence in publishing, advocacy for writers, and a unique contribution to the strength of the overall literary community.
Whew. I hope folks are applauding as loud as you can. Your mic is likely on mute, so you can applaud even louder. We are very pleased to introduce our first reader of the evening, Edgar Gomez. Edgar is a Florida-born writer with roots in Nicaragua and Puerto Rico, and the author of the hilarious memoir, High Risk Homosexual. Edgar is also a nonfiction judge for BLR's BLR Prize for Nonfiction. Edgar, the floor is yours.
I've been asked by the Bellevue Literary Review whether I believe writing can be healing, or is that just a thing people say? And it's a really big question. It's an intimidating question, but what the first thing that it reminds me of is this common piece of advice that a lot of nonfiction writers receive, which is to write from the scar, not the wound. Meaning that if you're writing about something that is traumatic, something that hurt you, that it is sometimes best to wait until you've already healed before you write about the thing. Oftentimes, if you wait a little bit, you are able to access a new perspective and gain new insight that you wouldn't have in the heat of the moment. Oftentimes when I'm like, let's say, I don't know, I'm writing about a breakup. Right after the breakup, I'm in just so much like pain and agony and heartbreak that obviously everything I write is going to be really melodramatic. It's probably going to be very one-sided, with me being the hero and the person who broke my heart being the villain. But if I wait 2, 3, 4 months, oftentimes then yeah, I can access a different perspective and gain new insight. That said, you do lose a lot of things as well. Some of my best literature that I like to read is literature that feels very vivid and alive and melodramatic, and oftentimes writing in the heat of the moment is what can produce that kind of art. And so, yeah, there's something to be said about both sides. In general, I do believe writing can be healing, but I also think that it isn't therapy. I think therapy is therapy, and writing can be therapeutic. And in my own life, writing about really traumatic things has really just given me the space to sit down with my feelings and reflect on whatever it is that happened. I'm a very like avoidant person. When something traumatic happens to me, I usually just like shrug it off and keep it pushing. And I think that's the result of just like an onslaught of trauma that I think a lot of people can relate to, especially in the pandemic. Every other day we turn on the news and it's just some other horrible piece of thing that we just have to swallow and move on and keep living our lives. And through writing, through literally just sitting at my desk for 4 or 5 hours, a couple of days a week, sometimes for months at a time, and really processing how I feel about whatever it is that happened, has helped me. But I can imagine there are some people who are writing about certain subjects, for example, a death or a sexual assault or something like that, where it can be very triggering to sit down with that memory for hours at a time without a professional's help. So it's a very complicated issue. I will say, yes, it can be healing. And now I'm just going to read a short passage from my memoir, High Risk Homosexual. This is from chapter 3, titled Mama's Boy. And in this passage, I am 17 years old. I'm in high school, and basically I feel like a freak because I'm one of the few out queer people on campus, and basically just desperate to get out of this homophobic environment, which is high school. I go to gay pride one weekend. So here goes. It was gay pride weekend, so that Saturday, I rode the city bus to the parade with a flask of guava wine, the only alcohol we had at home, shoved into my underwear. It wasn't my first pride, but it was my first one alone. I wondered if the other people seated around me on the bus had any idea where I was going in my little denim shorts and tank top. Once there, I followed the sound of upbeat music to a street overflowing with gay people. I found a spot among them and watched the trans elders marching with their fists in the air, the go-go boys hurling condoms from the tops of floats, the dykes on bikes pressing on the horns of their motorcycles, leaving in their wake a road littered with beads and confetti. I tried to match everyone's energy, but it felt awkward to smile and scream by myself, like I was crashing a party and they all knew. I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to be proud of. The closest thing was this. The year before, I came out to my mom. We'd been at the Clinique counter inside Saks Fifth Avenue, waiting to ask an employee about a coupon we'd gotten in the mail. There was no good reason for me to do it then, like there hadn't been one when I told my ex-boyfriend Angel. I suppose I just wanted to get it over with, and my gut told me she wouldn't make a scene around so many rich white ladies. I have to tell you something, I said, laying it out as gently as if I were dropping the words into hot oil. I think I like boys. I think I'm gay. Okay, Mom said, and then she put on her sunglasses, I guess to cry. I was getting ready for her to grab my arm and pull me out of the store when a salesgirl came up to us and offered her some free samples. Mom smiled and acted as if nothing had just happened. Maybe I should have thought it was strange how quickly the moment passed, and a part of me did. But mostly I was focused on the fact that seconds later, she'd moved on and was buying me a 3-month supply of face wash. That's it? I thought. It was such a nice idea that I let myself believe it. She really doesn't care. It wasn't until we made it back home and I heard her sobbing on the phone with an aunt that I understood how badly I'd hurt her. I expected my aunt would talk some sense into her, and when she finished the call, she'd come into my room and kick me out or whip me. But she didn't. She didn't do a thing. I was so grateful I got it in my head that I could repay her for her acceptance by proving that my being gay didn't mean I was going to change. If she waited a little, I'd show her I was practically still straight. Within a week, I hung up a Miami Dolphins football calendar in my room, threw out all my rom-coms, packed my flamboyant clothes into a suitcase, and hid it under my bed. In retrospect, this must have only confused her. It confused me. After all, what was the point of coming out if I was just going to recloset myself? Standing on the side of the street at Pride, surrounded by queers who seemed way more fearless than I could ever be, I felt like a poser. I ducked inside a porta potty and swallowed the flask of guava wine in one gulp, gagging at the toilet stench flooding my nostrils. The graffiti-tagged walls were slimy with humidity, the space cramped and dark, but I was more comfortable in there than outside. It was easier to breathe with no one watching. When someone knocked on the door, I summoned the nerve to open it by promising myself I could leave in an hour. There was a strip of sidewalk nearby where businesses had set up booths selling rainbow sunglasses and giving free rapid HIV tests. I made my way over and tried looking available by standing near groups of strangers and laughing. Some of them, mainly older men wearing Western shirts tucked into Wranglers, played along. Pride is so corporate now, they said. And smile, what do you have to be sad about? When I was your age, whew! I accepted greedily. Their attention, the vodka cranberries and tequila sunrises they offered. They moved in closer, rubbed my chest through my clothes, squeezed my ass. Where do you live? They pulled me between their legs, slobbered on my neck. How old are you? With my mom, I answered, wiping their spit off my skin. Almost 18.
Thank you, Edgar. Oh, we loved hearing about your book. That was wonderful.
I was struck by Edgar's comments about how timing and distance from events can affect the writing process. I've wrestled with the poem for years and find this wound versus scar approach quite provocative. Perhaps it's not everlasting procrastination, but evolving perspective.
And it's that perspective that I think is unique to BLR. Most of the writing submitted to us deals with moments of vulnerability, moments that can be extremely challenging to get onto the page. And what blows me away is the bone driving courage of the BLR writers. It takes a lot to wrestle those emotions and experiences onto the page.
The editors on BLR's poetry team each read hundreds of poems this year. We experienced the soul bearing in each BLR submission, many authors writing for the first time about a topic. We collectively hold space and aspire to be gentle and careful with everyone's submissions.
Our question tonight is, can writing transform healing, or is that just a trope? We polled a group of healthcare workers who are also writers about if and how or frankly, whether writing can transform healing. Here's what they had to say about the power of the pen.
I absolutely believe that writing can transform healing in medicine. I'll say that for me personally, writing is a way to recapture time with myself and to engage with the stories that I exchange with my patients on a regular basis. It allows me to reflect on the genuine experiences of sorrow, love, frustration, humility, and pride that impact me each day that I get to do this job. Writing takes me out of my head and allows me to be with my heart. It helps me to see myself and my patients as fully human. And I believe this is actually where true healing really takes place, not just with our prescriptions or with more procedures, but in our ability to see ourselves in each other and our full humanity.
We have some data on that from, I think, the 80s or 90s, if not sooner, that it can transform healing or at least help with disease management in things from asthma through cancer. But transforming healing is something bigger, isn't it? And so I tend to think of that as something people do to deal with their motivation for self-healing and self-care, for managing stress or mental illness. And I have used that with patients who are able to engage in that way. There is, of course, also the question of transforming healing for the clinician. As a person who is both introvert and extrovert, I will say that writing allows my introvert self to flourish, really sort of leaving me the extrovert self to be very present in clinic. It's also an option to a way to reflect and to learn from my practice, to learn about myself, to learn what I've done wrong, to think about how to do it better, to consider other perspectives. And from that, I do believe it has transformed me as a healer. And I look forward to seeing all the other answers to this really important question. Thanks.
So I'm here in the sobriety garden here at Bellevue Hospital. The hospital's behind me. And to me, it's also the serenity garden because it gives me a lot of serenity and inner peace. And a lot of patients and families come out here. And writing does the same. Writing gives me a lot of inner peace and serenity. In a system that's filled with chaos and trauma and suffering, I think it gives the opportunity to process a lot of the emotions that I feel with my patients. As an infectious disease doctor, I treat patients who have COVID, HIV, monkeypox, that are many times the result of kind of structural and social inequity. And writing allows, I think, me, my patients, their families, to really connect and build community. When my writing resonates with others, I love kind of talking about how pain can lead to purpose.
I love the question, how can writing transform healing? Because I wrote a whole book called Healing, it's right there, When a Nurse Becomes a Patient, about my diagnosis of breast cancer and treatment, which was 5 years ago. And here I am, I'm still here, doing well. The book came out of a feeling that as a nurse, I was so surprised how lacking in compassion a lot of the care I got was. And I started to reflect back as I was being treated on instances when I was a nurse, when things hadn't gone well. And I thought, well, big picture, we're saving this person's life. They are going to get their chemo. It's just going to start a day later than they wanted. All kinds of things that we would call glitches in healthcare. But to patients, they're not glitches. They're terrible. There are these moments when you feel completely let down, you lose trust in the people taking care of you. And so writing the book for me was very healing in terms of writing about the lack of compassion that I felt, and then going back and saying, why in the richest country in the world have we created this assembly line healthcare where the caregivers don't have time to actually care for people the way that we would like to? And I wish all of you luck on your healing and writing journeys.
If any of these providers are taking new members in their respective fan clubs, please let me know where to send a My Chart message. As a patient with chronic illnesses and disabilities who regularly interfaces with the healthcare system, I can't emphasize how important it is to have medical providers and healthcare advocates with these thoughtful, nuanced perspectives. I need to download this montage and view before my next appointment. Better yet, broadcast it to the waiting room.
Hear, hear. Our ability to support and promote writers relates directly to the financial support from our readers and donors. In particular, we want to recognize the very dedicated BLR friends who support the BLR Literary Prizes. The Goldenberg Prize for Fiction has been continuously supported by the Goldenberg family since the very first year of the BLR Prizes in 2006. The Felice Buckfar Nonfiction Prize is supported by the Buckfar family in honor of their mother, Felice, who absolutely loved to write.
The BLR Poetry Prize was sponsored for many years by Jan and Marika Vilcek, longtime BLR supporters. Jan Vilcek is a member of BLR's advisory board. I know firsthand the effect of a prize on a writer, especially one in their emerging years. I hope you will consider making a donation to BLR. Your support directly impacts writers' careers, as I well know.
The BLR Poetry Prize is now sponsored by two BLR board members, Lynn Lombardi and Lesma Fraser. The John and Eileen Allman Prize honors the late poet John Allman. And now, we'd like to introduce one of the BLR Prize winners. Lilliam Rivera won honorable mention for the Goldenberg Fiction Prize with her amazing story, Death-Defiant Bamba, or What to Wear When Your Boo Gets Cancer. That story went on to win a Pushcart Prize, and Lilliam's writing career has taken off. Her newest book is Barely Floating. Her previous novel, Never Look Back, a modern retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice set in the Bronx, has just been optioned by Amazon Studios for a feature film. Lilliam Rivera joins us, appropriately perhaps, from Los Angeles.
Death-Defiant Bomba was huge for me in a lot of ways because it was the first time I was writing a short story and I really didn't know what I was doing. So for me to submit it to Bellevue Literary Journal, for it to be selected and as an honorable mention and then go on to be awarded a Pushcart Prize meant that it was the beginning of my literary journey. It was really the beginning of my career. And also the story is very much tied to my own life, my personal life. At the time when I wrote the story, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, bladder cancer, and he had to, we had to do a lot of medical appointments, and I was always his advocate. So I was always really the one person who was like just making sure everything was taken care of. To me, my way of coping with this was writing this short story and finding a way of dealing with the coldness or the bureaucracy of sometimes these really huge medical institutions, and finding a way of how do I go in there. It always felt like I was entering into like a war zone of like being prepared as much as possible. And so this character that I wrote wears a red dress that, is her way of coping, of her armor of dealing with like kind of the coldness of these institutions. And writing as healings, it's as my way of healing. It's truly the only way I could deal with most things is through writing, through fiction, creating characters so I don't have to like just really kind of drown in anger or rage or sorrow. I could find a way of coping in very different, differently through these characters who might, handle it differently or or give me more courage. I've written about Hurricane Maria, how it affected Puerto Rico. I've written about depression, my own depression, but I do it all through these characters, through these fictional characters. And with this particular story, which was really a great way for me to write this kind of like really like horrible sense of like not being able to control anything, I used the form of bomba, and bomba is a Puerto Rican traditional dance and music. And there's a very specific form of doing the dance. You know, you greet the conga player, and then the conga player, it becomes a dance between the dancer and the conga player. And as the conga player is drumming away with your dance, it becomes like a crescendo, and it goes faster and faster. And it really is kind of like there's a word that says despojo. It's like a release, you're releasing. And I really wanted that kind of like structure when I was writing this character. So it does have a feel of like she is dancing with this institution, with this doctor, with this, with whatever, with her husband, whatever these kind of obstacles, and she's finding a way of communicating. And so I'll just read a little snippet of it, and I'll start with the saludo, which is the greeting. Your stomping heels will arrive first at the doctor's office. You'll immediately go up to the glass window, the one that resembles the bodega back in the day when you would pay $1 for a Lucy in the middle of the night. The receptionist will smile and say good morning. You will not smile. You will say good morning and let her know why you're there, why you're both there. You'll say it all angry because that's how you feel, like everyone is at fault all the time, even the person that held the elevator door for you seconds ago. You'll say thank you, but the thank you will sound more like a fuck you. You'll fill out the papers while your boo grabs the Sports Illustrated magazine. You'll fill out the medical history. You have it memorized, but you pull out your iPhone and pretend to look up the information like an executive assistant. You'll have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you're not wearing red, you're not waiting for an appointment, you and your man are fucked. But you'll have insurance, and when you get to that part where they'll ask you who is the emergency contact person, you'll feel good knowing that your name goes in that slot. Your number goes in there, and you'll feel secure because this is your weapon of choice. You are the one for emergencies. There's the waiting game, and you hate playing the game, but you know the rules already. You give them a few minutes, maybe more, but usually less. Then you'll get up and ask them when they're going to call you. It doesn't matter that there are others waiting. It doesn't matter that the old man with Alzheimer's is still at the window trying to figure out how to get back home. It doesn't matter. You'll approach the window and demand to know a specific time, right down to the second. And your man will shift his bony ass uncomfortably in the sunken leather brown sofa, but he won't tell you to stop. And then you'll call his name. You'll grab everything and rush out the door because you don't want them to change their mind and call the Alzheimer guy. No, viejo, you want to tell them, this is mine. You walk so closely to the nurse who's leading to the office and you almost trip her. You're doing this on purpose. You want to watch her fall to create a distraction, an obstacle you can use to climb over and show your man that whatever comes your way, you know what to do. But he's only looking at the nurse's tight ass. And you'll make a mental note to start working out again. You'll squeeze your butt and keep it squeezed. When you're led to the doctor's office, you'll glare at all of the diplomas. If he got his degree from some city college, you'll look at him like your cousin who got his degree at the Drive Institute. If the doctor got his degree at any of the Ivy League schools, you will still look at him like he's your cousin, but you'll do so only for a second. If the doctor is older than your own father, you'll listen to him respectfully, taking down notes while he speaks, nodding when the moment is right. If he's younger than you, you'll listen to him, but know that you'll get a second opinion because no first out of my damn job doctor is gonna know what he's doing. Hell no. The doctor will have graduated from Columbia University. You'll shake the doctor's hand firmly and will look carefully at your man to make sure he does the same. When you feel that your man's handshake was too weak, ended too quickly, you'll be embarrassed by him and wish he had worn the suit. The suit would have given him the allure of power, but now he looks like a punk. You'll notice that his baseball hat is almost covering his eyes, and you'll fight the urge to slap it off his face.
Thank you, Lilliam. That was so beautiful to hear.
It's great to see Lilliam's career trajectory. The BLR Prizes can be a springboard for emerging writers, and BLR is intentional about supporting writers long after the press release and the social media posts fade. Now that I'm behind the scenes as an assistant editor, it's humbling to know how many team members are rooting for BLR authors. The planning, attention, and care put into an issue is extraordinary. We're already looking at issue themes for 2025, and it's only 2022.
Yeah, we read some 4,000 submissions every year, even while planning 3 years in advance. We rely on our dedicated reviewers, the unsung heroes, to sort through these thousands of submissions. Then our editors read, discuss, and horse trade until we come up with the final selections for each issue.
And one thing that distinguishes BLR is that we often take the step to not simply decline a submission, but we include notes to authors with constructive critiques, perhaps a brief suggestion for the perfect alternate journal to consider. Sometimes just a sincere thank you for welcoming us into your life. We're holding space for and with you. After all, we're writers and understand the aforementioned courage and vulnerability involved in submitting to journals, particularly competitive ones.
Yes, and even after we select the writing for an issue, there's a whole other process. So much layout, design, proofreading, author communications, plus unexpected supply chain delays. This year there was printing press delays, shortage of paper, postal delays. All this goes into the final process of creating the actual journal. But the most tense moment is opening that first box that gets delivered. My heart is always in my throat. It's always so exciting and a little nerve-wracking to get the first delivery from the printing press and to open it up and see what's there. Here it is, issue 43. This is our 43rd issue with this beautiful cover art by Lauriston Avery. And inside are all the amazing stories, poems, essays from our authors, all the work from the editors and writers together, book reviews. It's really exciting. Now here it is, out for the world, BLR's 43rd issue. But the best part is reading the new issue. Even while on the road, here is BLR's illustrious managing editor, who behind the scenes holds the entire BLR enterprise together, Stacy Bodziak, crossing First Avenue, triple checking that we did not have any typos.
And I hope that she was also triple checking the traffic, because we couldn't do this work without
Don't
Stacey.
try this at home.
I have to pause and soak in the cover art. I think my favorite is issue 35. 36, maybe 37. No, definitely 38. But actually, I love 39. And I'm biased. I adore 40, 41, and 42. Okay. Hands down, favorite issue is 43's cover art.
The most recent issue on the theme of recovery features the otherworldly art of Lauriston Avery. And he added an artistic statement that tells us how his artistic process was directly affected by his own recovery. Now, as writers, we love having art on the covers, but we've never known much about how this art comes to be. And so this time, for this issue, we decided to find out. I recently biked over the Williamsburg Bridge to Bushwick, Brooklyn, to visit Lauriston Avery's studio. Here's a short clip of that visit, but though I'll confess that my legs gave out by the end of the day and I took the ferry back home to Manhattan.
Basically what you're seeing here is my process. I usually work on a number of things at once. Pretty much everything in here is in process. There are a couple of things that are close to being finished, but my motto is it's not finished until it leaves the studio. All of this stuff like on the floor, on tables, all the, this accretion over here. This is me building history.
So where do you start?
Where do I start? I'd have to go back years, actually, because there's things like laying around here that were probably on paintings.
Oh, so you pull them off.
I do, like, my process is pretty, I'll put stuff on there. I don't work with sketches. It's all just immediate. It goes on the surface. And as I'm working with composition and light and shadow and feel, I'll have to start ripping things off and then putting them back on. And, at the end of a work session, there's usually like a pretty good pile of what once was elements on a piece or on the floor, and I collect them and I sort of these are starts. Even though the surfaces may look pretty beat up, that's because those surfaces were other paintings, some time ago. And right now I'm just sort of just pinning things down on there. What we have here is, this is all construction adhesive. Then I've sort of made these elements. Some I just make, and some were on paintings.
You just squeeze them out and...
Yeah, I just sort of like squeeze it like it's all like extruding. All kinds of like goodies from old paintings and some tinsel in there. And this is actually this is a head that I started to make. I kind of make, like, lately I've been making like body parts. Like that's a torso, that's a head. And I usually make those on the table or on the floor. I may chop that up and that may become a shoulder. I can take this all out. And here's the start of a hand here. Depending on the material, like, it's going to absorb the light differently. And it may, like with this, it's pretty much all the same color white, but the whites, the wood is receiving the light differently here, as is the fur.
So the other window for me as a physician is the human body.
Yeah.
And this feels like we're seeing layers of the body.
For sure.
Stylized, but those like the cells going around and the vessels and the heart pumping and the lungs moving. There's a sense of the homeostasis of this whole piece that feels like the human body. I mean, there's the GI tract.
When I think about my physiology, this is where everything's going on. This is where I get all the feelings. Right. This is where when I look at artwork, I feel it from here.
This is really fantastic. Well, thank you so much for letting us film.
Yeah. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Such a striking visual, one that I'm craving to literally feel. I want to soak in the tactile experience, the texture, the depth. The contemporary artwork is fitting, as many BLR writers engage in deep reflections on the physical body, how it blossoms, decays, regenerates, skin peeling, organs failing, vital stabilizing, hope returning. I'm inspired by the generosity and humility of artists such as Lauriston Avery. If potential readers judge a book by its cover, then BLR is in good hands.
Absolutely. And speaking of humility, understatement, and brilliance, BLR recently had the pleasure of hosting Edward Hirsch, the celebrated poet, president of the Guggenheim Foundation, and absolutely tireless advocate for poetry. He was interviewed by BLR poetry editor and his former student, Sarah M. Sala, about his acclaimed new book, The Heart of American Poetry. For those of you who weren't able to hoof it over to the Center for Fiction in Brooklyn, here's a tiny taste of the amazing conversation that night.
I was thinking as you were speaking that it's so lucky as a reader for us to be able to have you kind of over our shoulder talking about these poems so passionately as well. And it's so well researched too. One of the things I was going to ask you is, like, how did you research into their backgrounds? Because it feels so inevitable when this information comes, and yet there's so much in this book that I, as a student of poetry, never knew about.
Thank you for saying so. Don't be mad at me, because for what I'm about to say. But if you know from the introduction, I wrote this book without my books, because it was during the pandemic. I mean, I had this commission to write a book for the Library of America, about 40 American poems to coincide with the anniversary of the library. And I thought the hard task, which we'll come to, would be choosing which poems.
Right.
Because you can't have the same canon that you had in 1950. But if you put in Amy Lowell and you have only 40 poems, you got to drop Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, it's just like, there's just numbers here.
Right.
And so I thought that was going to be the hard decision. But then during the pandemic, I moved down to Atlanta to be with my partner. My books are in my office in Manhattan because I don't have an apartment big enough to hold my poetry library. And so I had to write this book without my library. And at first I was very, very distraught about it. And then I believe it helped me because it forced me to think for myself. And that's part of how I got to those lines. Like, instead of thinking about what you already knew, you just think, instead of looking up what Helen Vendler says, or Hugh Kenner says, or what all the critics say, we go, what do you actually think? Like, what do you think about this poet? What do you think about this poem? What do you think about these lines? What do you think about the stanza? I mean, I just forced myself over and over again to decide what did I actually think after a lifetime in poetry. I mean, I'm bringing a lot to it. I had already had my feelings about Amy Lowell and about Ezra Pound, and his insults to her. I was reading through the Dial when I was in college, and I found all these insults to American literature by Ezra Pound. And Amy Lowell was one of the people, and it sort of made me alert to, like, well, maybe there's something in here because I don't like Ezra Pound, and so maybe I'm gonna go like see what I can do, see what I can. So I had this already on Amy Lowell. I didn't just discover this during the pandemic, but I had to choose which poem, and what I thought of it, and how I wanted to make the case for her inclusion.
That's really wonderful. I love, like, we're continuing with the subversive poets theme. It was like a gauntlet that Ezra threw down that you picked up. I love it.
The idea, though, your idea was not just to present the poem, but to take you through, well, first of all, because every poem was a representative for me, because it was one of 40, it was a chance to, one, introduce the poet. And as you know, this book is a kind of education in poetry, so I leave a lot of my errors in, like what I first thought about a poet and then how I got schooled. Because I first had this idea that I got from Eliot and Pound, and then I started thinking, well, what is this? And then I started rethinking it. So it's my first exposure, because I was on my own. I'm just remembering what happened when I first read this poet, and what did I think? And what do I think now? And is it the same, or is it changed? Often it's changed. And how did I get to the new place? And then what do I think about this poet? And then I drill down on what do I think about this poem? And then the essay. And the idea is really that the poem stands right at the beginning. You can just read that if you want. But in all my work, I try to be a guide, stand in not for the poet, but for the reader, to take you further into the history of poetry and how this poem relates to it, and what you might see in it that you might not see on your own. And then it's up to you. But my idea is to, like, act as the reader of one reader responding to this, and then you don't have to take my interpretation or not, but I'm going to just present you with what it is. So that's the structure of how it works.
And I really appreciate that structure too, because poetry can be intimidating. Poetry can seem like a closed room sometimes if we're not sure how to open the door or crawl through the window, right? So I guess if someone is new to poetry and wants to get into poetry more often, what might you say to them to remove that intimidation, or, help them become readers who enjoy poetry more?
I would say to them, How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry, which is the book I wrote to try and answer that question. Like, how do you speak to an initiated and an uninitiated reader? When I was working for Double Take magazine, they did a little brochure called How to Read a Poem, and this was the key to, we had stumbled on something towards a larger audience, because they had me do 10 things. Like, the first one was like, turn off the television set. Like, you can't, if you have the TVs on, you're not gonna be able to read poetry. Like, get a good light, like that. Relax, then, like that. And they just couldn't keep the brochure in print. I mean, people were responding to it. There's so many people who, I believe, you can't single out poetry because the American educational system is so bad. But one of the disasters has been, and casualties has often been poetry. Because teachers don't like poetry and they don't know how to teach it, and they have a bad feeling, and they punish you. If you go into a second grade class, kids like poetry. You go into a 6th or 7th grade class, they don't like it anymore. Something happened. So the first thing literally is relax. The second thing is bring people poems that you like, that you actually care about. That not just because of the meter, or not, the way we were taught it was like, a sonnet is 14 lines. There's a Petrarchan sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet, yawn. There'll be a quiz on it. No one ever explained why you would want to write a Petrarchan sonnet or why you would want to write a Shakespearean sonnet. And I have a lot to say about that. Because the sonnet was invented in Sicily in the 12th century by a bunch of notaries. And they were legal minds, and they came up with a kind of legal structural form. But what they hit upon was that they could turn this legal mind to erotic love as a subject. So you have these legal minds trying to think about erotic love. Well, no wonder you have sonnet sequences. You can't just get to the bottom of this right away. It turns out it's an inexhaustible subject. It just keeps overrunning the logic, because love is not logical. And you just keep having this happen again and again with Dante, with Petrarch, and so on. I don't want to go into a history of the sonnet, but we weren't taught the sonnet like that. Right. We were taught it was just this form. So I think you begin with the poems, and then when you try and explain the poem or talk through the poem, then you immediately get to the sonnet form, then you immediately get to the structure and how the structure works, and then you begin to see how the structure works and how the poem is a kind of delivery system for the emotion and the feeling and the thinking.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that context is essential. Like you said, starting with poems that you love and adore, or maybe have memorized, right? Or have on your fridge. When I first started dating my spouse, we had the same poem on our fridge. I was like, that's a thumbs up. I think we can do this.
I'm gonna marry you.
Yeah, exactly. Our poems align. We can do this.
Yeah.
Ed was intentional about his book representing the diversity of the literary landscape versus how narrow the literary canon is often presented. He said he worked to include American poets who aren't traditionally anthologized, like Julia de Burgos, and also revisiting poets who are unfairly discounted, such as Amy Lowell.
He also spoke about the power of poetry, and what was amazing to be there live is to see the audience absolutely transfixed and energized. By the end, everyone was just cheering to become poets, to buy poetry, to read poetry, the urgency of how important poetry is for the American experience. And he makes the point that America's created by all these writers who bring their own stories and their own histories to the page. And so now I'm really excited to introduce the writer Marie Myung-Ok Lee, a Korean-American writer who explores many of these similar themes in her new novel, The Evening Hero. Marie was the first Fulbright scholar to Korea in creative writing and is a founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop. And she's also a judge for BLR's Goldenberg Prize for Fiction. Marie will chat with us for a few minutes and also read a short excerpt from her new novel, The Evening Hero.
Hi, my name is Marie Myung-Ok Lee, and I'm really excited to be here for the Bellevue Literary Review. I'm the author of this new novel, The Evening Hero, which takes place in the world of medicine, among other things. And while I was working on the book, I followed a lot of doctors around, spent time in the hospital, particularly a good friend of mine who is an OBGYN, just like Myung-Ok Kwak, the protagonist of my novel. And when I was following her around, the novel's actually taken me 18 years to write. And in those years, including during COVID, I remember remarking to my friend that I admired so much that while I'm sitting here sort of sequestered and cloistered in my apartment, trying to finish my novel, she was out there risking her life, helping people. But then she said that one of the reasons she particularly loved taking the time to take me around the hospital and introduce me to people, she's an avid reader. And she has a very strong philosophy on the healing power of literature, particularly about how literature can help build empathy, grow worlds, and even for herself, she finds literature one way to help her get rid of maybe baked in assumptions that she has about the world. So seeing it through her eyes really made me kind of look at what I did anew. So the novel has to do with a elderly OBGYN who is in rural Minnesota. He's been at the same hospital pretty much his whole career. He's a Korean immigrant who survived Japanese colonialism and the Korean War. But in this little town, nobody really thinks about that. They only see him as the guy who delivers the babies. And what's happening, I'm going to be reading pretty much from the very beginning, is after today, everything's going to change. But he doesn't quite know it yet because it's a few hours off in the future. William Y. Kwak, MD, Horse's Breath, Minnesota, 2000. Youngman's office was strategically placed between the surgical suites and the labor and delivery rooms. You walked by the imaging room whose door had a sign that said, "Please do not smoke during your ultrasound." Then through a door with a sign that said, "Maternity ward," and "Push, push, push," above its automatic opener. This heavy door kept the noise of the ambulances out, but Youngman was always imagining he heard sirens. Youngman waved to his secretary Rose, whose half-size office was umbilically connected to his. She had left his white coat on its hanger behind the door, pressed and cleaned and sheathed in protective plastic. Suddenly, Youngman remembered the letter. He patted his jacket pocket. Ooh, still dry. He opened the slim middle drawer of his desk and placed it in the back, even beyond his RX pad and stash of Tic Tacs. He checked the ER whiteboard. His longtime patient, Mrs. Mackey, had called him at home this morning, complaining of indigestion. She wasn't due for 2 more weeks, but she tended to deliver fast. 3 children, each labor faster than the previous. So he told her to come in, just to be safe. Especially since recent cuts meant fewer ambulances were available. Of course, this would add to his workload. Normally, Maud, his nurse midwife, could do the workup and the monitoring, but there had been sporadic layoffs for months. It seemed there was no more flesh to cut, but she had been a casualty of last week's Friday night massacre, along with Kate Javerina, the hospital social worker. "We all have to do more with less," said Tinklenberg, the hospital CEO, "if we're going to keep Horse's Breath General viable in this market." Market? Youngman scoffed to himself. They were talking human beings, not rubber balls or boxes of cereal. CEO Tinklenberg's predecessor, who'd been with the hospital more than 20 years, had been an MD with a master's in public health. Tinklenberg was an MBA brought in 2 years ago by the private management company Synergistic Action Network - US Health Systems, which had made the tantalizing promise to the Board of Trustees that Horse's Breath General would be debt-free in a mere 2 to 5 years. The precipitously aging and dwindling population of the town meant a shakier financial footing. The hospital could regain its former stability if they gave Tinklenberg free rein to do his magic. But all they'd seen so far was fewer staff, fewer supplies, even basics like IV saline and Tylenol were troublingly often in short supply. Telephone problems, which used to get fixed right away, languished for days. Also, their ER had been downgraded one trauma level, then another. The new sign at the entrance read, "Minor injury only, not 24-hour. For emergency, please dial 911." So if I can talk about my own 911, I'd love to talk about how important literary magazines are to new writers. When I was first starting out as a writer, I was working at an investment bank, knowing that I was going to someday be a writer, but not knowing how. And literary magazines were really my only connection to the world of letters. People in banking tend to not be that interested in literature. And so that was one of the few places, and it took many years, but that when I first published a story, a short story, I finally felt like I could call myself a writer. And that had always been such an important part of my, not only my career development, but also just having the mental sort of resiliency to go on pursuing art, which is always a very tricky proposition. And so what's very special about the Bellevue Literary Review is it is the only journal that focuses on health, illness, and healing. It was probably over 25 years ago, and I remember this also because it was before the internet, when a friend of mine in my writing group showed me this beautiful story she'd written about a Japanese American family and the question of a young person in the family donating a kidney to an elderly person. And it was a beautifully nuanced story that also had to do a lot with culture and how people feel about the body and filial responsibilities. And she told me that she was thinking of sending it into the Bellevue Literary Review. And she did end up getting the piece accepted. And that's how I found out about the wonderful Bellevue Literary Journal, which I enjoy reading regularly. So I would ask that if continuing these kinds of literary journals is important to you, particularly this very unique journal, I would suggest that you make a donation today and take out a subscription. Because among other things, your support will help new voices come to the table. You may or may not know that these literary magazines are one of the ways that literary agents find their clients, and that publishers sometimes find new people to publish. I do know that when I first started publishing, that was one of the few ways from my banker bubble that I could kind of send my writer self out into the world. And that was kind of my representation, and I was so grateful.
Marie's comments about literary magazines initially being her sole connection to the world of letters deserves repeating. A writer's first journal publication can lend a sense of legitimacy and validation. Furthermore, print journals literally are a tangible display of an emerging writer's hard work, one that agents, editors, presses, and literary peers take note of. We appreciate Marie noting that BLR was a leader in the pre-internet age and that the journal continues to be a leader in spotlighting the breadth of medical humanities writing.
And we're so appreciative of our contest judges like Marie, Myung-Ok, and Edgar Gomez, and the families who support the BLR prizes. These prizes make such a difference in the lives of our writers in so many ways.
Indeed, as the COVID pandemic continues to limit public reading and performance opportunities, the ability to be paid for writing is even more essential. The financial impact for me personally, as a disabled writer on fixed Social Security disability, was quite meaningful. Persistent economic precariousness and the starving artist trope cannot be the norm. BLR has prioritized increasing author payments by 50%. This is particularly notable as BLR is a nonprofit organization. Clearly, BLR is able to financially compensate authors because of support from donors like you.
Marie mentioned a story that a friend of hers submitted to BLR many years ago, and I remember that story exactly, The Liver Nephew. I remember reading it in the slush pile and being transfixed by the cultural and medical clashes. It's this powerful story about the American son of Japanese immigrants who was expected to donate his liver to his ailing uncle, and bravo to the author, Susan Ito, for writing such a memorable story. And by the way, all of these back issues can be purchased on BLR's website.
There's nothing like a piece of writing that draws you in. She says he didn't like the idea of going to a hospital, much less letting them open up his body and take something out. He had seen enough of hospitals with his parents, his father's wrists tied to the metal bed rails with cotton gauze rope. How can you not read the rest of this? So many powerful stories are contained in each BLR issue.
Speaking of powerful stories and voices, here are the voices of a few more BLR friends grappling with the question of if and how writing can transform healing.
As a nurse practitioner at Bellevue for 35 years, the only writing that may have transformed or perhaps fostered healing was the personalized instructions I gave to patients, the written instructions, before they left the emergency room. As a writer, my writing has transformed me, yes, but it never could heal me or heal the reader. Healing was never what I was after as a writer. My last book was about an elderly daughter caring for her elderly father who died. It was fiction, not a memoir. But the daughter was me, of course, and the father was my father. And as I wrote it, it did transform me. It served only to deepen my loss, my regret, and my guilt.
Poetry and stories keep us grounded and engaged. They make us better seers, more tolerant of ambiguity, of inevitable work stress, and each other. A wealth of evidence-based data supports this. Every year, more healthcare training programs incorporate humanities education into their curricula. Even the Journal of the American Medical Association has a poetry page.
I started my clerkship year in January, so I've been involved in patient care for less than a year. This year has been a roller coaster ride filled with experiences that I've never had before. Some experiences have been really wonderful, like assisting in a surgery that will cure a patient of cancer or helping a patient deliver their baby. But other experiences have been incredibly sad, like witnessing a patient die. Whenever this has happened to me, my team was caring for many other patients, so there was limited time to mourn or even discuss the death of the patient. Writing has been my outlet to process these difficult situations. It's given me the space to mourn the loss of the patient while also allowing me to reflect on how I can best care for the next patient who is on the brink of death due to terminal illness or trauma. Writing has helped me cope with the difficult experiences in medicine so that when I'm done with my training, I'll be a better doctor.
When I'm asked about this, I usually start with the work of Judith Lewis Herman. She is a psychologist, and in her large-scale study of trauma, called Trauma and Recovery, one of the ways that she defines trauma is as that which cannot be fit into narrative, an event that has no meaning and floats free of our understandings of the world. And recovery, in large part, consists of making meaning, of being able to tell a story in which the traumatic events have meaning in a person's life and purpose. And so what I would say is that writing is a way of making meaning. Writing is a way that we put something on a page and then we can see it from outside of ourselves. And writing and healing are not things that one does once. They're practices, they're processes. And so they're intimately connected. And they do have punctuated moments. We do finish things and send them out into the world. We do see the scab heal over and fall off. We do realize that we no longer have the cold that's been keeping us in bed. And so if we think about these things as processes that are intimately related, we can see why we're never done with writing, why we're never done with healing, and why these two things are something that we need to carry into the world. And the Bellevue Literary Review is a pretty great vehicle for it.
I just want to pause on the power of the pen to combat compassion fatigue. Wow. Again, like our first montage, these medical providers are filling me up and giving me life. And now we have to figure out how Jason, the previous BLR poetry editor, can start billing insurance. Our chief poetry doctor, Jason Schneiderman, will see you now. That has a great ring, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. We've been talking a lot about how writing transforms healing, but we can really broaden this to how all of art transforms healing. We had a little peek into Lauriston Avery's artistic process, and I now want to introduce you to the artwork of Dr. Mike Natter. By day, Mike is an endocrinologist who just finished his training at NYU Bellevue. By day, he's also an artist whose work has exploded over the course of his medical training. Here's just a small taste of the work that Mike Natter does.
I've been drawing ever since I was a little kid, but when I got to medical school, my art took on some new roles. Initially, it was didactic and helping me learn and teach medicine, but then as I made my way through the medical training world, my art became a catharsis. What we see and do in the hospital carries with it a lot of emotional weight, and it's often difficult to process that. I found that by drawing, it helped me alleviate a great deal of that weight, and I believe art plays a really essential role for everyone, but especially healthcare workers, and especially now.
That video makes me want to grab pen, paper, even this lip balm on the desk and start creating.
Me too. I just want to start doodling on the page. Salim, I know and from all those records behind you that you do music and art in addition to writing. Can you speak to us a bit about the interplay of these art forms?
Sure, yes. Hybrid approaches are so important because they offer multiple entry points for diverse audiences. Likewise, collaborative projects build community and bring folks into conversations. It's so exciting to see BLR continue to look for creative ways outside the box, off the page, to share transformative healing experiences. Many of you may recall the wonderful dance and poetry film Reading the Body that we created in 2021 in partnership with the Paige Fraser Foundation on the topic of disability. That film became an official selection for 7 national and international film festivals.
And it's been so much fun working on this variety of off-the-page events with so many creative partnerships. There's been Can Storytelling Prevent Gun Violence with the Northwell Center for Gun Violence Prevention. We did COVID and the Creative Process with the Brooklyn Book Festival. There's also Poetry and Parkinson's with the World Parkinson Coalition. We did Black and the Ivory, Writers Confront Racism with the Gold Foundation. And of course, the wonderful book talk event with Perry Klass, a BLR board member, interviewing the amazing Delia Ephron about her brush with death and her new book.
I'm so pleased to introduce Alma Gaxiola from the community event, co-sponsored by BLR and Northwell Center for Gun Violence Prevention. Alma is a high school student, and the urgency of her piece is palpable. I'm eager to see her poems to come. Here's Alma Gaxiola reading Price Tag.
If every life's a story, then theirs will always be worth more. Mine was drowned out by the water, running like fathers for the door. And if my Sunday morning tunes were the sounds of a life lost, on the streets I played with friends, whatever did my story cost. I guess the price I paid for you to promise them a chance to leave every mistake I made behind with my pre-written happenstance was just the story you now tell, only a life of wasted tears. And if you bottled every one, they'd sell quicker than the years. Passed by like sinking ships in rivers filled by my mistakes. I guess a moral floated by, one I didn't mean to create. Created in my wondering, formed by my midnight screams, into my blood-stained rear-view mirror, the hands I killed with wasted dreams. But if I had heard a story to stop the bullet in mid-flight, whatever might have changed, what would my life look like? Would you still use my life as an example not to follow? Would I still have stopped to ponder the fatal questions in the hollows? Could a bullet really cleanse every wound of mine insult from the closed eyes of a mother for every child she has lost? Could a shot or two really mask the blood red ringing in my ears of the baggage I forgot to drown out with my biggest fears? Well, if every life's a story, then I just hope theirs aren't lost. I hope they never stop to wonder, whatever did my story cost?
Wow. I'm replaying Alma's line, but if I had heard a story to stop the bullet in mid-flight, whatever might have changed, what would my life look like? As I said, the speaker's urgency is absolutely palpable.
You know, it was the story of this poem is quite amazing too. We read through so many powerful entries for this Can Storytelling Prevent Gun Violence event, and we were so taken by, in particular, the freshness and directness of her voice. Unfortunately, our emails to her did not reach her, and the weeks went by. We were up against the deadline. We still hadn't tracked her down, but we could not bear to lose this amazing poem. So in the end, we figured out what high school she attended. We cold called the principal, who reached out to her mother, who then got to Alma. And the very next day, Alma gets home from school, throws off her backpack, sits down and makes the video with us in one crisp take. It was the most nail-biting and rewarding experience.
Supporting young writers, helping bring new voices into the world, that's what BLR does. Please add your support so that we can continue to encourage emerging writers like Alma.
You know, I know that there are many larger charitable organizations out there that many of us support, and they're wonderful. But one thing about donating to a smaller organization is that your donation has an exponentially more powerful effect. BLR has essentially no overhead, so donations go directly toward producing the literary art. And as you know, we believe strongly in compensating artists and writers for their work. So your donation is directly energizing the artistic and cultural community that we need ever more so in this crazy world of ours.
We've seen a lot of hybrids and intersecting identities tonight. Nurse writers, doctor editors, poet artists. Earlier this year, BLR hosted one such hybrid, the writer and pediatrician Mark Vonnegut, in honor of his new book, The Heart of Caring.
Mark Vonnegut's book has much to say about the state of medicine today, but the clip we'll share here, in it, he reads a section about his father, the writer Kurt Vonnegut Jr., and much of the scene takes place in Bellevue Hospital. And I remember that day so clearly, because that's where I work, when the elder Vonnegut was admitted to Bellevue, sadly in a coma, after he fell and hit his head at the age of 84. And here now are some of Mark's recollections of Kurt's final days, starting with his father's annual letter about the state of affairs.
If I should die, God forbid, were the opening words in his yearly letter to me describing what he did and didn't want to happen when he died. It's amazing that a man who smoked 2+ packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day and lived as long as he did, and that at the end something else killed him. He claimed that doctors told him not to quit smoking because it would be too great a shock to his system. A neurosurgeon resident at Bellevue Hospital referred to him as a cultural icon. I never have or will, but except this. I usually referred to him as Kurt, as if I referred to him at all. I loved him dearly, but there was something about calling him Dad that didn't sound quite right. He was more like an unpredictable little brother who might get himself or me or both of us into trouble. When my sisters and I started calling him Junior, he went to the trouble of legally changing his name to Kurt Vonnegut. After falling and hitting his head, my father passed through the surgical ICU suite reserved for President George Bush, who wasn't using it at the time and thankfully never did. Along with the high-tech medical equipment that was keeping my father alive, the 25th floor of the magnificent steel and glass tower had a very nice, unobstructed view of the East River that my father never woke up to see. I felt bad for the neurosurgery team. There was nothing surgical for them to do, and they struggled to find not too awkward things to say. I would have given anything to have him wake up and make wry observations they wouldn't know how to take. Maybe about the nice view or the fact that he was in the ICU bed reserved for President Bush if anything happened to him in New York City. Quite an honor. It took several weeks for him to die, mostly because of medical interventions nobody felt that they had any choice over. I was his proxy, he had a living will, it didn't matter. Uncertainty about when to stop trying to save someone's life can happen to anyone, but there was something about the patient being famous that upped the ambivalence ante. I'm sure that without my father's special rank, he wouldn't have ended up in the special surgical ICU bed with his floor-to-ceiling glass windows looking out over the East River. 84-year-olds with brain injuries don't do well. After you get to a certain age, just about everything that happens to you is permanent. Knowing how and when to let a patient go isn't easy, especially once you've saved their life a few times and they're stable but ventilator dependent. Even with the fall and certain knowledge that there was no meaningful hope, who wants to be a firing squad of one? Ultimately, we had to transfer my father to a different hospital that would allow us to carry out his wishes as best we knew them. We took him off the ventilator, and as my father's son, I couldn't help saying, I hope he hasn't changed his mind about the no extraordinary measures thing. There's a really good neuro rehab in New Jersey that takes ventilator-dependent patients. Wake up, Dad, I can't believe you're missing this. President Bush's ICU bed, view of the East River, neuro rehab in New Jersey that accepts ventilators, cultural icon. Neuro rehab in New Jersey could have been the title of one of my father's short stories. There's still quite a bit of cortical activity. Great, Dad, you still have cortical activity. So we made a playlist of his favorite songs, mostly jazz from the 40s and 50s, plus the Beatles, which we played at medium-high volume whenever nothing else was going on. When we were finally able to take him off the ventilator, he had been on it for 4 weeks. It's not impossible that he was looking at an eternity of hellfire and saying, no, 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 please don't take me off the vent, but I doubt it. In high school and college, there are people who wonder what the big deal is about reading, and maybe about life in general. They read a Kurt Vonnegut book or a story, and something clicks. They become part of something bigger than themselves, and it feels good. He made people feel less lonely. He was a gateway drug to the world of reading.
He was the gateway drug to the world of reading. And boy, does that resonate. I think for so many of us, we can remember those gateway drugs to reading that we discovered. Me personally, I still have my well-worn copy of Welcome to the Monkey House, Kurt Vonnegut's amazing short story collection from my summer camp years. We used to read it around the campfire. So thank you, Kurt Vonnegut. Thank you, Mark Vonnegut, for this wonderful reading and experience.
Indeed, literary magazines are accessible gateways for the public to discover amazing new writers and rediscover established legends, but they are also gateways to successful writing careers. So many now famous authors trace their beginnings to literary magazines who took a chance on them. Your support allows BLR to continue amplifying these voices.
And at BLR, we are always so excited to watch our writers grow. We've watched many writers expand their BLR publications into full-length books. We also watch the arc of their careers develop with both excitement and pride. Back in 2010, BLR published a short story from an unknown writer, Celeste Ng, Girls at Play, and that story won a Pushcart Prize. And as you all probably know, Celeste's career skyrocketed with her novels Everything I Never Told You and Little Fires Everywhere. You may have read these or watched the popular TV series, and her third novel, Our Missing Hearts, just came out this fall.
I also learned that Leslie Jameson was actually an unknown writer when her stories Letter to Machiko won BLR's Goldenberg Prize for Fiction. Her subsequent books, The Empathy Exams and The Recovering and Make It Scream, Make It Burn, all became bestsellers.
Actually, in the very same issue of BLR that Celeste Ng appeared in was another unknown writer, Kali Fajardo-Anstine, and her amazing story Remedies became part of Kali's first book, Sabrina and Karina, which went on to become a bestseller, accrue many awards, including being a National Book Award finalist. And Kali joins us today from Denver, Colorado, to talk about how writing can affect healing and to read us an excerpt from her new novel, Woman of Light.
Today, I want to answer the question, does writing have the ability to heal? And to me, the answer is a resounding yes. Writing can heal. Especially in my own life, writing has helped me so much with my mental health, my physical health, and also my spiritual health. I struggled with depression throughout my teen years and my early 20s. And I really feel that writing Sabrina and Karina and Woman of Light is something that sort of pulled me out of that and allowed me to prioritize my own health and to take care of myself in a way that I had never before. In my own family, working on these novels has allowed me to become closer to the elders. Woman of Light is a novel that took over 10 years to write and research, and it's based on my own family history. While I was writing this book, my godmother and my cousin, she's in her mid-80s, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the process of visiting her, listening to her stories through these many, many years, it made us grow closer together. And in a lot of ways, it helped me see, what a treasure it is to have our health, but also how wonderful it can be when someone is sick to be there with them and to listen to their stories. So I definitely believe that writing has the ability to heal, and not only the individual, but the community and the family as well. Writing Woman of Light, it was during the pandemic when I was finishing up the draft of the novel, and I was living in downtown Denver, and everything was closed off. We were sheltering in place, and I would go out on long walks throughout the city, and I would pay attention to the architecture, the original streets, the sidewalks. So this novel is set in the 1930s and in the 1890s. And even though I wasn't able to go out and be in restaurants that were packed with people, I still felt this idea of the crowded city space through the imagination. It was often very lonely finishing a novel during the height of the pandemic, but it did allow me to think about, what are my priorities? Am I thinking about this in terms of a once a season book that came out in the summertime and then people will stop reading it? Or am I thinking about my books in terms of generations? People will be around longer than I will. They were around before I was here. And it's important to me to think about my work having that kind of longevity. So I would love to read a little bit from Woman of Light for you today. Both of my books, Sabrina and Karina and Woman of Light, deal with the theme of healing. And in particular, in Woman of Light, there is a brutal scene early on at the beginning of the novel where Luce, who's our protagonist, she's a 17-year-old tea leaf reader and laundress. Her brother Diego has been run out of town by a violent white mob. In fact, he's been incredibly injured during a horrible, horrible attack. And so the scene I'm about to read is when the family matriarch, Maria Josie, she's taken over healing Diego as his wounds are recovering in their small tenement in downtown Denver. To the Edges, Chapter 6. For 7 days, Maria Josie sat at Diego's bedside, reading aloud from an old copy of Don Quixote, breaking only for meals, sleep, and her long shifts at the mirror factory. Between the book's pages, Maria Josie would glance up with a watchful gaze, casually, as if checking the clock. It had snowed, patting the exterior brick and rickety roof in a pleasing weight. Several times a day, Luce brought Maria Josie water with iodine and an herb called plumajillo. She'd walk swiftly to the nightstand and placed a white dish beside wilted lilies and dried marigolds and heaps of bloody gauze and wooden rosaries. There were santo candles burned into liquid wax, San Miguel glowing from his eyes, The bedroom smelled like sickness, a plumy stench that clung to Luce's clothes and hair. She had opened the windows only to mingle the smells of illness with carcass and smog. Raina and Corporal looked on from their glass cage, and because Maria Josie was afraid of snakes, Luce took over their feedings. Sunlight would warm their faces as she dropped mice into the cage. "Any better?" Luce asked one afternoon, sprinkling hay into the terrarium. Maria Josie sat beside Diego, cleaning with her glasses. "See for yourself." From across the room, Luce considered Diego's face. It was the size that frightened her most, the inhumanness of his proportion. "I just didn't understand why they'd do it. Why Diego?" she asked with sadness, thinking of the bricks slammed into her brother over and over. Maria Josie grimaced, curving her arm in a flannel jacket over the chair's back. "They're men. White men." She pushed forward and gripped Diego's foot, small and paw-like beneath his quilt. "That's what they do."
The layers of culture, class, sickness, hope, race, and violence, to bring all these together in just those few short pages? I don't know if Santa's tuned in tonight, but if so, I'd like to revise my wish list. Please include every book read tonight. I can forgo the new vinyl records I requested. Santa, look, I know you're busy, so we're making it easy for you and everyone tuned in this evening to purchase these amazing titles directly from BLR's bookshop.org account.
And as we're drawing to a close, we want to thank the many artists, writers, readers, and friends who've contributed their work today.
We'd like to thank everyone who's made a contribution. If you haven't yet, there's still time, and we appreciate every donation that comes through.
Now, you might be wondering exactly where your donations go and what they actually accomplish. Here now we present the dogs of BLR, plus their BFFs, to tell you exactly how your money is used.
Rivera, and I am the winner of the 2020 Bellevue Literary Review's Golden Book Prize for Fiction. And this is Anita Pepita, my editorial assistant. With her support, actually her interruptions, she reminds me that I need to take breaks. And sometimes she makes editorial suggestions by draping herself over my keyboard. As an emerging writer, BLR support helped launch my career. It gave me visibility with agents and editors who contacted me as a direct result of my publication in BLR. I was also able to connect with new readers because BLR's mission to publish work that focuses on the body is something that truly unites us all. It is so important and sometimes rare for writers to get paid for their work. BLR has just increased its payments to its writers by 50%, quite a heavy lift for a literary magazine. But BLR is committed to supporting their writers. Your gift of $150 will help pay a writer for their work in BLR. Anita Pepita and I hope you'll make a donation. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bettina Klein, and I'm the board chair of BLR, and this is Chester. We are so delighted to be here celebrating BLR's benefit. We'd also like to ask for your support. If you donate $250 tonight, you will enable BLR to continue to access the necessary tools that they need to create the wonderful writing of the BLR Journal. I love BLR because it helps me discover new authors and learn about so many new topics that really affect the way I think about my health and wellness and the way I see others. I really hope that you'll join and contribute to BLR tonight. Want to say bye, Chester? Yep, bye.
Hi, I'm Laura Bagstad, the Vice Chair of the Bellevue Literary Review Board. This is Oscar, who is also an avid BLR enthusiast. I both discovered and joined the BLR board last year. I was delighted to delve into content that conveys the human experiences surrounding health and healing at a time when these topics felt all the more relatable and important. I encourage all of you to read and support this unique journal where you will uncover literature, essays, and poetry of the highest quality. We are here tonight to celebrate BLR and ensure it has the broadest possible readership. A donation of $500 allows us to donate journals to prison libraries and other community centers free of charge. Oscar and I thank you for your support.
Hi, I'm Doris W. Chang, Assistant Fiction Editor at Bellevue Literary Review, and this is Core. I'm so proud of the important work that BLR does, publishing literature that reflects the diversity of human experience through the lens of health, illness, and healing. In a world that feels increasingly divided, literature has the power to create understanding. The stories, essays, and poems we publish get at the heart of what it means to be alive and help us make meaning of the world we live in. Your donation of $1,000 will help us produce events like COVID and the Creative Process and Can Storytelling Prevent Gun Violence? Important conversations about art and the issues that affect the larger community. Cora and I hope you'll make a donation today. Thank you for your support.
Hi, I'm Damon Tweedy, nonfiction editor of BLR, and this is Coco. A donation of $2,500 keeps our website and database running. It allows us to keep digital editions of BLR to reach even larger audiences. Coco and I hope you become a supporter of BLR. Isn't that right, buddy? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Theresa Brown, and I'm the Development Manager for Bellevue Literary Review. And this is Blue, a rescue from China and ferocious supporter of the literary arts. I support BLR because I believe it has the capacity to change the way we speak about illness, healing, and most importantly, mental health. A donation of $5,000 helps get an issue to the printer and to your mailbox, and most importantly, pays for the high quality printing that enables BLR to support contemporary artists, poets, and writers. I hope you will join Blue and I as a generous funder this year.
Well, I was more in the gerbil, hamster, rabbit camp than dogs.
Oh man, Sully, why don't you say so earlier? Sweet Potato has been waiting in the wings to make her debut. She's one of our most dedicated readers, related to an unnamed nonfiction editor. The word on the street is that she may have actually nibbled a bit on the last issue.
Oh, cuteness. I am so stunned. Get it? Is there any challenge the BLR community can't rise to?
You know, we take everything as it comes. So thank you so much to all of you attending tonight. We appreciate your community, your support, and your readership. And thank you, Salim, for sharing the stage tonight.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a true pleasure.
We'll see you all at the next event. Bye.